So the 2021 Formula One season has come to a close, but if you know anything about Formula One, you'll know that the Formula One circus never really does. Whether it's the off-season or the middle of the season, there's always some kind of testing and some kind of lap running going on throughout the world. And this week, Formula One was doing some official tests in Abu Dhabi. Now, this week there were quite a variety of cars, anything from just taking the car out from last Sunday to mule cars from 2018 with 18-inch rims on them. So there's quite a lot to talk about, quite a lot of testing data that teams were getting, and quite a lot of interesting storylines. So I'm going to talk to you guys about that today. So, this is my kind of testing report from Formula One's Abu Dhabi testing. Let's just talk about day one and the interesting things from day one. Now, Nick de Vries was the fastest of all in the Mercedes car with a 1 minute 23.191 lap. Second was Liam Lawson in the AlphaTauri with a 124.517. Third, Oscar Piastri with a 124.523. Fourth, Pato O'Ward with a 124.607. And fifth, Guan Yu with a 125.142. So there's obviously a lot of young drivers in there. As a matter of fact, all of the top seven was filled out by young drivers, sixth place being Yuri Vips and seventh place being Nick Yaloy. But there were some other full-time F1 drivers running in that session as well. Notably, Valtteri Bottas in his new Alfa Romeo ride and George Russell in his new Mercedes car. There were also others like Ricciardo, Stroll, Leclerc, Tsunoda, Ocon, Verstappen, and Mick Schumacher, who were all running in their normal entries. It was a bit interesting to see that Mick Schumacher did not run with Ferrari. You might assume that as he's a member of their Young Drivers program, but their Young Drivers program is also quite large, so they kind of need to get those drivers that don't have F1 experience into cars and have Mick just run in the Haas. So let's go ahead and compare some of these times to give them some comparison from this race weekend. Now, to really get a good sense of the times that these are being compared to, I'm going to go ahead and go off of comparisons from Free Practice 3 at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix this weekend. Now, the fastest driver overall, Nick de Vries, in the Mercedes car ran a 123.191. This is actually faster than Lewis Hamilton's 123.274, which is the fastest time from Free Practice 3. I'd say it's a pretty equivalent amount of running between free practices 1, 2, and 3, and then this entire session, since these testing sessions are longer. De Vries got in about 77 laps, and generally people will get 25 or so laps in each free practice session, so I'd say it's a reasonable comparison. It is very interesting to see that De Vries was faster than Hamilton with a similar amount of laps, but that's probably also due to some amount of data that they had. I assume, though cannot confirm, that this was run on their current Mercedes car. Most of the testing was probably done at slower speeds due to just, the cars being not as fast. If you're running older cars with older with tires that aren't as good, it's probably going to be a little slower. Although the mule cars they were running, if they were from 2019, they might actually be a bit faster than the current cars, because I guess I'd have to check that if the 2019 or 2021 cars are faster. But I'll tell you for sure the 18-inch rims are slower than the current ones. But yeah, so moving on down the rest of the field, there was a 1.3 second gap to Liam Lawson from Nick de Vries. So very interesting that there was that big of a gap between the top two drivers. But after that, it closed up. Piastri was only about a hundredth of a second behind Liam Lawson. Patricio O'Ward, coming over from IndyCar after he won a bet with Zach Brown. I think, if I understand it right, the bet was basically if he won an IndyCar race this year, that he would get a chance to drive an F1 car, and that's exactly what he did. He actually won 2 races this year at Texas and at Detroit Belle Isle. So, yeah, it was pretty cool for Pato. He said it was a... So I'm going to read you a quote from Pato from AutoWeek.com. He said, "These cars are ridiculous. I was expecting crazy and insane, and this is crazy and insane times 10. The capabilities of what these cars are capable of, I don't know how. I thought the Indy car was fast, and it was just crazy, man. I don't know what else to say. These things just bend the laws of physics. It's just absurd what they're able to do." So, it seems like Pato enjoyed himself and was very surprised by how fast these F1 cars were, so I'm glad he was enjoying himself. He was out in the current spec McLaren. I can confirm that based on pictures and stuff, which is another thing I actually want to talk about. McLaren was running their current spec car the entire weekend. When they were out on the new 18-inch rims, they were out on their current spec car, just adjusted for the 18-inch rims. So, interesting to see that they didn't bring one of the mule cars out, but maybe it helps them more with their testing, since those cars are, first of all, closer to the regulations that we'll see in 2022, though obviously there's quite a big difference, but it is a little bit closer than what the 2019 cars would be. But yeah, seemed like Pato was quite enjoying himself out there. Next up was Guan Yu in the Alfa Romeo in 5th. Of course, he'll be running that car next year, taking the spot of, well, presumably Antonio Giovinazzi, the way it works out. Alfa Romeo's switching both their drivers, but I'd assume Bottas is taking the Raikkonen spot, and Zhou is taking the Giovinazzi spot. That doesn't really matter, but he's driving for Alfa Romeo next year. So he's driving for Alfa in this, and he ran a 125.142. And in comparison to his teammates, free practice 3 times, it was just a little bit slower. Raikkonen had a 125.037 and Giovinazzi with a 125.048. Zhou had a 125.142, so just a little bit slower than his teammates in FP3, though he could be excused for that because, it's his first time getting a lot of experience running an F1 car. I assume he has run an F1 car before, but his first time testing with his new team, and it's understandable that he'd be a little bit slow, but he was quite close to the pace of his teammates. Now I'll just take a little bit of time to talk about drivers running for their new teams. Obviously, we talked about Zhou and his performance relative to the Alfa Romeo cars. Valtteri Bottas was also out in Alfa Romeo, though he was out on the 2019 spec car with the 18-inch rims, so the car was obviously a bit slower. He ran a 127.183 and was 12th. So not terrible for Valtteri Bottas in his first time in an Alfa Romeo, which is of course a bit slower than his Mercedes car that he was running before. The other driver that was running with his new team was George Russell, the guy replacing Valtteri Bottas at Mercedes. He ran a 128.062. He was also out on one of the older spec cars with the 18-inch rims. So, again, you'd expect to see him a bit further down there. But he was 18th out of 19, which was very interesting, only being behind Mick Schumacher. But he was right behind Max Verstappen. So, my guess is that they were just trying to go out on long runs and test these new tires, which you'd expect at this point, since that's probably the best information they can get out of this session. If they're looking for testing young drivers, you'd probably want to put them in the current cars, but if you're testing the new tire specs, I'd say definitely put whoever you're gonna have in there next year for that, and that's what a lot of teams did. They just had their drivers for the next year come out and test those tires, which, yeah, that's what a lot of those teams did. Now, day 2, which was Wednesday, was a bit of a slower day as for drivers out on track. There were only 10 drivers making laps this practice session, though very interesting was that Robert Schwartzman in the Haas was the fastest overall with a 125.348. He ran 130 laps in what looks like the current Haas F1 car with the 18-inch rims. So, to give you a little bit of a judge. That's actually right about what Mick Schumacher was doing in FP3. So very close to the current car. So probably not that big of a difference between the 13 and the 18-inch rims. Teams would probably be able to give a better insight on that just based on what they've seen from testing, but it seems like there's not a huge difference, though I'd assume that the Haas drivers probably weren't out as fast on their FP3 runs or something. I assume there's at least a little bit of a gap between those two compounds that's more than 8 1,000ths of a second. So, yeah, that's one thing. Another interesting thing about Schwartzman is he ran with both Haas and Ferrari throughout this weekend. He actually ran twice with Haas. I think at the beginning of the day on Tuesday, and then ran with Ferrari at the end of the day on Tuesday, and then ran all day with Haas on Wednesday. So that was very interesting to see Schwartzman switching around teams, though not like super interesting or anything, saying as Schwartzman is a member of the Ferrari Young Driver program, so he's part of that, so they probably wanted to get him in the Ferrari for at least a little bit and then testing for some more time in the Haas car. Second place was Lando Norris with a 125.809. They were out in, like I had said, their current car with the 18-inch rims. That was interesting to see that they didn't bring out the mule car. Again, I think I've already said all this. But yeah, I mean, it was in their new livery thing and everything. I don't know if that's a livery they're planning to keep for at least off-season testing or anything. I don't know what all's going to happen there, but yeah, it was interesting to see McLaren running their current 2021 spec car. Third was Sebastian Vettel with a 126.379. Fourth was George Russell with a 126.404, improving by quite a bit from his Tuesday time and getting all the way up to fourth on the time charts. And fifth was Pierre Gasly with AlphaTauri. This session was all current drivers except for Haas, who ran Robert Schwartzman and Pietro Fittipaldi. The rest of the drivers, Norris, Vettel, Russell, Gasly, Sainz, Alonso, Zhou, and Perez, were all 2022 drivers running with their 2022 teams. So yeah, like I had said, it was a slower session overall. Of course, only 10 drivers running, and it was mostly current drivers just getting a little bit of testing on those new 18-inch rim. Speaking of those new tires, it seemed like a lot of teams were doing some different things with what tires they were running. Of course, there were teams running the full-on configuration of, tire covers on the wheels and stuff, like they'll be running in 2022, but it was very interesting because there seemed to be a lot of teams doing some different stuff, some different combination of wheel covers, no wheel covers, or just flat out no wheel covers at all. I think the most common configuration I saw out of anything was no wheel covers on the front and wheel covers on the back, so that was interesting to see what all teams are doing with that. I don't exactly know why they'd be doing that, because they're running full wheel covers in 2022, to my knowledge. I might be wrong on that, but I assume that's what they're doing. But yeah, it's interesting that they were doing that. Another interesting thing I want to talk about, Alpine went out with their 2018 spec car, which was a bit interesting. It's got those like super complex little winglets on the front wing. So it's interesting that they did that instead of bringing out like their 2019 car or something for that, but I'm sure there's a reason they did that, but who knows. Yeah, it's just interesting that they would bring out a car with all those. I mean, the 2018 cars are pretty aero complex, especially comparing them to something like a 2022 car, which those things are built to bring down aero complexity. Doesn't exactly matter, but it's just interesting. They did that. So that's about all I have from this pretty jam-packed testing session. So this will be the last time for this year that there will be an official F1 sanctioned test. Of course, teams will probably be out running individual tests at all different tracks across the world, probably with some variation of their 2022 cars, though none of that's going to be covered by the media, so we probably won't know much about that until those cars are released in 2022. So, bit of a long off-season coming now. I think it's something like 100 days between now and the first race of 2022. But there'll probably be a lot of news coming out in between then. So, I will be there for every bit of it. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I'll see you all later. Bye.